During the 24th century BCE, the first of the great Mesopotamian empires came into being, the Akkadian Empire. This was the first time that the ancient land of the Tigris and the Euphrates was unified into one single state, headed by a king and supported by a vast army and extensive bureaucracy. This video will take a look at this turning point in the history of ancient Iraq. Who were these Akkadians who overwhelmed the ancient Near East during the 24th century BCE? They were a Semitic people who were bound together by a shared language, Akkadian. The Semites had been an important part of northern and central Mesopotamian society already since the 4th millennium BCE. Ancient Iraq was then dominated, however, by the Sumerians, a non-Indo-European people whose origins remain obscure to this day. The Sumerians organized themselves into small independent city-states. It is important to note that just as the Greeks later on, they deeply treasured their independence. In any case, during the 3rd millennium BCE, the Semitic people gradually became more and more dominant. For example, kings of the first dynasty of Kish, a city in northern Sumer, carried Semitic names. It is interesting to note such favorable conditions for Semites in this particular city. It in fact helps to explain the rise of the Akkadian Empire. Kish was namely the settlement where the first king of the Akkadian Empire rose to power and whence he conquered his empire. This man was Sargon of Akkad. Sargon's actual life is shrouded in mystery. There were many legends regarding his youth and rise to power, the majority probably being fiction. It is possible that some of these stories date back to his lifetime. Most paint a positive picture of Sargon as a perfect individual and exemplary king. It is interesting to note that some of these stories sound quite familiar. For example, Sargon was said to have been found as a baby in a basket on the bank of a river. We see such a narrative return in the Bible with Moses, and with Romulus and Remus in the legends of ancient Rome. There are also other biblical stories which strongly resemble some episodes of Sargon's life. This could point to already vibrant cultural contacts between Mesopotamia and the Levant during the late 3rd millennium BCE. Be that as it may, it is nearly impossible to get a clear image about the early life of Sargon. In any case, he attained a high rank at the court of the king of Kish, Ur-Zababa. The legends tell us how the monarch of this city saw in a dream that Sargon would replace him on the throne. After a failed assassination attempt on Sargon's life, the king of Kish sent the Akkadian away to Uruk, where he urged the local king to kill Sargon. In his turn, the leader of this powerful Sumerian city failed to get rid of Sargon, who thereafter seized the throne in Kish, thus fulfilling the ominous dream of the deposed king. The forces of Sargon consequently embarked on a series of campaigns to bring the whole of Mesopotamia under Akkadian rule. Their first important enemy was Lugal-Zagesi, the king of Umma. Umma was then one of the most powerful city-states of Sumer, and Lugal-Zagesi actually was the closest a monarch had ever come to establishing a Mesopotamian empire before Sargon appeared on the scene. He was, however, outmatched by the Akkadians, who defeated him and incorporated his territory into their empire. Sargon also decided to found a new capital, from where he could control his provinces, Akkad. This city, however, hasn't been found to this day, and remains a mystery buried in the sands of time. After having subjugated the whole land between the Tigris and the Euphrates, Sargon became hungry for more land, more resources, and more people to rule. It is difficult to assess which lands and cities exactly fell under the power of Sargon. Our primary sources about the Akkadian conquests are their inscriptions celebrating the victories of the king. Few of these have survived in their original form. We still, however, possess a great deal of old Babylonian copies of these royal inscriptions. The Akkadians most certainly reached the Levant to the west, and the rare inscription from Sargon's time proves that the Elamite city of Susa in the east was controlled by the Akkadians. One tradition has it that Sargon also ruled the Anatolian plains beyond the Taurus mountain range in modern-day Turkey. This is probably made up, since no archaeological evidence has emerged to support this claim. Controlling this empire of unseen proportions did not go without difficulty. Already during the lifetime of its founder, the Akkadian Empire was plagued by many rebellions. As I've said before, the conquered Sumerian city-states had a 1,000-year history of independence. Their resistance to the Akkadian Empire to be integrated into a bigger regional kingdom was therefore natural. Despite these separatist tendencies constantly threatening the empire, Sargon's kingdom became extremely wealthy through tribute and trade. Securing the trade routes was always a principal concern of the Akkadian kings. They were in fact obsessed with luxuries, such as the silver from Anatolia, copper from Oman, the cedar wood of Lebanon, and lapis lazuli all the way from Afghanistan. They did not hesitate to go to war in order to secure the import of these products. Since the Akkadians were the first to rule such a vast area, they were the first to be confronted by the challenge of exploiting and controlling such vast swathes of land. One solution was to simply allow rulers of the conquered cities to remain in place, as long as they paid tribute and recognized Akkadian overlordship. Other regions were subjugated to direct rule by a governor. The Akkadian imperial organization was underdeveloped according to some scholars. This then contributed to the eventual demise of the kingdom. One big flaw, for example, was that the governors were too powerful. They had all judicial, political, and military power in their provinces. This gave them the confidence to rise in arms against the Akkadian king. A consequence of this relatively weak organization was that the success of the empire was largely dependent on the charisma and personal abilities of the king. The rulers of the Akkadian Empire tried to mitigate these problems through nepotism. By appointing trusted members of the family to important positions, they hoped to decrease the number of conspiracies and insurrections against the king. This, however, proved to be quite ineffective, as 2 kings of the dynasty were actually killed in palace conspiracies, of which one was perhaps instigated by a family member of the king himself. Another way to increase the power of the king, as well as his legitimacy, was by constantly sponsoring the most important temples in different cities. Thus, they tried to promote themselves as protectors of the Mesopotamian religion and the divine order of the cosmos. For example, the important cult of the moon god of Ur was extensively patronized by Sargon. He tried to closely tie his dynasty to this temple by appointing his daughter Enheduanna as its high priestess. Sargon thus established a tradition which lasted for another 500 years. The high priestess of the moon god of Ur, in fact, became a position reserved only for princesses of ruling monarchs. The grandson of Sargon, Naram-Sin, would later take the Akkadian religious policy to a whole other level, but more about that later. According to the Sumerian king lists, Sargon ruled for 56 years. He was succeeded by his son Rimush around 2278 BCE. During his short 8-year tenure as king, Rimush was primarily occupied with restraining the incessant rebellions that plagued the kingdom. He was killed in a palace coup, which may have been instigated by his brother, Manishtushu. Manishtushu ruled from around 2270 to 2255 BCE. This king was very successful in his wars against the eastern neighbors of the Akkadians, penetrating deep in Iranian lands. His reign ended in the same manner it started, by a palace coup. A remarkable figure then ascended the throne, Naram-Sin, under whose leadership the Akkadian Empire prospered for a second and last time. Naram-Sin was a grandson of Sargon and an extremely energetic and able man. Some scholars even claim that Naram-Sin may have been more powerful than Sargon himself. He firmly re-established Akkadian authority in the Levant after having conquered Ebla and Aleppo, both very powerful cities of ancient Syria. During Naram-Sin's monarchy, the Akkadian arts also experienced their apogee. This exquisite mask was formerly believed to have represented Sargon, but it is now presumed to have been an idealized depiction of King Naram-Sin. Another famous product of the Akkadian workshops was a victory stela of Naram-Sin, celebrating his triumph over the so-called Lulubi, a people that dwelled in the Zagros mountain range. Naram-Sin is a figure with the horns of a bull. Bull horns were an important symbol of divinity in the ancient Near East. Naram-Sin was in fact the first recorded Mesopotamian monarch who claimed to be a living god. Such pretentiousness was rather unusual in ancient Iraq. The worlds of the mortals and immortals were thought of as unbreachable. The ruler as a god was thus a completely new concept of kinship which Naram-Sin introduced. This proved to be too radical for the Mesopotamians. Later kings would not follow in Naram-Sin's footsteps in this regard. Many must have experienced this apotheosis of Naram-Sin as an insult towards the gods. Consequently, the fall of the Akkadian Empire, which occurred not long after Naram-Sin's death, was explained as a revenge by the gods against this ungodly man. According to a famous poem from the 21st century BCE called The Curse of Akkad, Naram-Sin is said to have plundered the temple of Enlil, the Ekur, at the city of Nippur, thus enraging the divine powers of Mesopotamia. The gods subsequently sent the Gutians, a people from the Zagros, against Akkad to lay waste to the lands of the kingdom as a punishment. This literary piece from the 21st century BCE is interesting because it is the first recorded explanation of a historical event. It also shows the obsession of Mesopotamians with the Akkadian Empire already some 100 years after its fall. This interest would endure until the days of the Neo-Assyrian kingdom. For example, the king Sargon II, who ruled around 700 BCE, presumably chose this throne name to associate himself with the glorious founder of the first Mesopotamian Empire. Be that as it may, no evidence has been found, however, that Naram-Sin ever disrespected the temple of the god Enlil at Nippur. On the contrary, archaeological research reveals that Naram-Sin actually supported the Ekur temple complex. But stories about angry gods aside, what did really cause the demise of the Akkadians? Invasions by the Gutians and Amorites did indeed destabilize the kingdom and greatly contributed to the downfall. According to some scholars, however, this is not to be regarded as the only cause. Research at the Tel Leilan has shown that climate change may have contributed. Indications have been found, in fact, of increasing droughts. This would mean that famines plagued the land. It would make sense, since at the same time in ancient Egypt, the old kingdom that was responsible for the Great Pyramids collapsed due to bad harvests and ensuing famine. The successor of Naram-Sin, Sharkali-Shari, who reigned between around 2217 and 2193 BCE, was not up to the challenge. The Akkadian Empire soon shrunk immensely, with another 2 insignificant kings after Sharkali-Shari before the dynasty completely disappeared from the face of the earth. Thus, after some 150 years, the first Mesopotamian Empire came to an abrupt end. After the fall of Akkad, a period of anarchy ensued, which lasted until around 2100 BCE, when the city-state of Ur broke out of its traditional boundaries in order to establish the next great Mesopotamian empire. There can be no denying that the Akkadian Empire was incredibly influential in the history of the ancient Near East. First and foremost, it was the first kingdom to rule the entire country between the Tigris and the Euphrates, and even beyond. They consequently served as a model for later Mesopotamian kingdoms. Later monarchs not only learned a great deal from the success of the Akkadians, but also from the things they did wrong. For example, the kingdom of Ur reduced the power of its governors after having observed how these officials were a source of problems in the Akkadian Empire. Furthermore, many aspects of Akkadian royal and imperial ideology, such as the king's titles, were later adopted by Mesopotamian rulers. Other Akkadian concepts were highly influential, such as the naming of a year after the most important event that took place then, a custom that was later repeated multiple times. Finally, the Akkadians definitely established Akkadian as a dominant political and administrative language of ancient Mesopotamia instead of Sumerian, which was dying out anyway by that time. The latter would still be used, however, for religious and legal purposes. Thank you for watching. My name is Olivier Goossens, and if you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like. And if you would like to see more videos about various historical subjects, please subscribe, and I will see you until the next time.